Welcome to The Explainer. In the world of economics, there are a few big ideas everyone seems to know, and Adam Smith's invisible hand is probably at the top of that list. But what if one of the most famous ideas is also one of the most misunderstood? Well, today, we're going to find out why. You know, this quote from Leak into Me Politic just hits the nail on the head. We've taken this really complex, nuanced idea from a brilliant thinker and, well, we've turned it into a bumper sticker. But what if that slogan is just plain wrong? So yeah, let's really challenge that story we all think we know. What's actually behind this famous metaphor? As you're about to see, the reality is way more interesting and honestly more surprising than the myth. Okay, first up, let's just lay out the myth. You've heard it a million times, right? The idea is that millions of us, all just pursuing our own selfish goals, are somehow guided by this invisible hand to create the best possible outcome for everybody. The market just sorts itself out, magically. But now, let's pivot away from the myth and go straight to the source. Let's look at what Adam Smith himself actually wrote about the invisible hand, and I gotta tell you, what you find when you do that is pretty wild. So you'd think this idea was totally central to everything Smith wrote, right? Well, take a look at this number. 3. In his entire life's work, all of his books, all of his essays, Adam Smith only used the phrase invisible hand 3 times. That's it. Just 3. And when you look at those 3 mentions, the context is everything. The very first time, he's talking about the invisible hand of Jupiter, literally describing pagan superstitions used to explain things like thunderstorms. The second time, he's talking about feudal landlords whose selfish spending on luxury accidentally feeds their workers. And the third, most famous mention in Wealth of Nations, it's not about the market at all. It's about one specific merchant who chooses to invest locally instead of abroad because it feels safer for him. So here's the kicker, the really crucial point. Smith never, not once, used the phrase invisible hand to talk about market mechanisms like supply and demand or how prices are set. The way we use it today. Well, that's a modern invention that you just can't find in his actual writing. All right, so let's jump forward from the 18th century to right now. Because if Smith's hand was really just a minor metaphor, today we've got something that's way more real and way more powerful guiding our economy. An algorithmic hand. See, this is the kind of world Smith was looking at. It was a market driven by people. You had a buyer, you had a seller. They each wanted the best deal for themselves, and somewhere in the middle, through haggling and competition, they'd find a fair price. It was simple, direct, human. But just look at our world now. On platforms like Amazon, Uber, or Netflix, our choices are constantly being shaped and guided by algorithms. I mean, get this. A crazy 80% of what people watch on Netflix isn't something they searched for. It's something the algorithm recommended to them. That is not an invisible hand. That's a very powerful, very tangible, data-driven one. And look, this new algorithmic hand is amazing in some ways, right? It's super efficient. It gets you an Uber in minutes. It suggests a book you might actually love. But it also cooks up all these new problems Smith couldn't have even imagined, like search pricing that feels totally unfair, or recommendation bubbles that trap us, or just the insane amount of market power a few giant tech companies now have. This brings us to a huge critique. And this one applies whether you're talking about an invisible hand or an algorithmic one. And that's its complete failure to see the hidden costs of things, what economists call externalities. So let's think about a gallon of gas. You see this price at the pump, maybe around $3. And that price reflects the cost to drill the oil, refine it, and get it to your station. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But according to some studies, this number is a lot closer to the real cost. Because when you start adding in all the stuff the market price ignores, the cost of healthcare from pollution, the price of climate change, that number just explodes. The price at the pump is only telling you a tiny fraction of the story. The late industrialist Ray Anderson put it perfectly. He said, trusting a blind, invisible hand is like trusting a company that leaves its biggest expenses off the books. It's basically an accounting fraud, and just like Enron, that kind of system is eventually doomed to fail. So that's the big question, isn't it? If the market's hand is blind to these absolutely critical costs, what's the alternative? How are we supposed to guide our economy to a better place? Well, for about a century now, the main answer to that question has been this idea of a visible hand. This idea really took off with the economist John Maynard Keynes back during the Great Depression. His argument was simple. When the invisible hand messes up, when it creates massive unemployment or ignores pollution, the government needs to step in with a visible hand to regulate, to invest, and to steer things back on course. And you can see this visible hand everywhere. It's what builds our roads and funds our schools. The economist Mariana Mazzucato makes a fantastic point that many of the key technologies inside your smartphone, think GPS, touchscreens, even the internet itself, they all came from risky, long-term government-funded research that no private company would have ever dared to take on. Okay, so we've got this back and forth between the invisible hand and the visible hand. But just when you think you've got it figured out, there's one last problem. And it's a real mind bender. How do we even measure any of this accurately? So here's the puzzle. The whole point of a market is that it connects everything to everything else. But that very connection makes it almost impossible to study. Say a factory shuts down in one town. Well, that doesn't just affect that one town. The workers might move, competing for jobs somewhere else. The price of whatever that factory made changes for everyone. It's like a shockwave that spreads through the whole system. So when economists try to measure the impact, they can pretty easily compare the town that lost the factory to one that didn't. They can measure that relative difference. But what they have a nightmare trying to measure is the total system-wide effect, the way the shockwave rippled out and subtly affected everybody, even the town that seemed unaffected. It's like trying to measure a mountain while you're in a boat on a rising tide. You can see the peak, sure, but you don't know how much the entire ocean has risen underneath you. That rising ocean, that's the hidden system-wide effect that our data so often misses. And that really leaves us with a huge, provocative question to chew on. If the original invisible hand was basically a myth, and our modern market is blind to its true costs, and on top of all that, its effects might be fundamentally immeasurable, then what in the world is actually supposed to be guiding our economy? That's the billion-dollar question we're all still trying to figure out.